Today, and welcome to the Pathways to High Quality Jobs for Young Adults webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded. At this time, I'd like to turn the event over to Kristen Abner. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and I am so excited to welcome everyone today to the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse webinar today. You'll also hear us say SSRC for Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse. And our webinar today is on Pathways to High Quality Jobs for Young Adults. My name is Kristin Abner, and I'm the Deputy Project Manager for the SSRC and a Senior Manager of Research Science at ICF in the Workforce Innovation and Poverty Solutions portfolio. So today, our speakers will explore which job characteristics are relevant to measuring job quality, how education, training, and work-related experience across the lifespan may contribute to job quality at age 29, and the ways in which interventions and policies can support youth from disadvantaged backgrounds to gain higher quality jobs. And we'll have Dr. Patricia McGuire of Trinity, Washington University to discuss the application of the research at the end, so I encourage you to stay on for the entire time because I'm really excited for that discussion as well in thinking about youth education and employment practices. So before we begin, I want to take a moment to introduce the SSRC to you and provide you some logistical information about the webinar. So I'll point you to the poll question. If you would please take a moment to answer our poll, that would be fantastic. It should be up on your screen. It looks like most of the folks on the line have already answered it, which is fantastic. So we'll move to the next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, the SSRC is federally funded by the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, which is within the Administration for Children and Families in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The SSRC started in 2009, so it's been around for about 10 years, and ICF, which is my company, leads the design and maintenance of the SSRC, and we are supported with partners from Child Trends, the Urban Institute, and the FANE Group. So our website link is up on your screen, and I encourage you to visit the website when you get a chance to get familiar with our library tools and materials we provide. Information, literature, and research featured on the website is organized around key domains of self-sufficiency that were really designed from the field. So we talk to researchers, practitioners, and policymakers working in the field of economic self-sufficiency to really define what that means. So we have topics that include employment, education, health, family formation, and TANF, just to name a few. So the SSRC is a strategic part of OPRE's efforts to build and disseminate knowledge about approaches to help low-income children and families. And we offer a virtual portal of research and resources related to self-sufficiency around those domains that I mentioned. We function as an online community of researchers, practitioners, and other stakeholders that are interested in self-sufficiency, employment, family, and child well-being. So, like I said, our primary purpose is to disseminate quality research, and our resource library has over 7,500 items. So, and we constantly are adding new resources, so you'll see every week that that number will increase. The key here is that any research that goes into our library is reviewed by a team of folks to make sure that it's methodologically sound and meets the criteria of relevance. So you're going to find resources that are relevant to self-sufficiency, and so things that are not would not be in our library. We're really broad in our collection criteria, which I think is helpful to mention here, that you're not only going to find academic journal articles, but you're going to find federal publications, you're going to find conference resources, you're going to find books and book chapters, just to name a few. So our library, if you go to our search library page, you'll see that you can search by multiple ways, which to meet our target audiences, you can search by keyword by typing in the box, or you can do a filtered search. And we have multiple filters that include things like topic area, but also methodology. So you can really drill down if you're looking for, let's say, a randomized control trial around SNAP ENT. So I would encourage folks to poke around those filters. The screen right now is showing our Browse Topics section, and this really came out of feedback from users that really wanted to get into the website and just go straight to recommended resources and and bypass the search function of the library. So what we did was we created a Browse Topics page, and if you go to these topic areas, you'll find what we call our librarian recommends. So we have top 10 resources on given topics around self-sufficiency. We call those our SSRC selections. We also have SSRC notes, which are kind of research, very short research to practice blog type entries that you'll find here under Browse Topics as well. Next slide, please. Great. I also want to encourage everybody on the line to stay connected with us, to stay involved with the research. We have an e-newsletter that we put out. We have organizations that we work with, our partners. So if you go to our partners page, you'll see other organizations that we partnered with on webinars and things like that. We have an events calendar related to SSRC. We have a data set and data sources page. If you're looking to conduct research and using a publicly available data set, we have a comprehensive list of those as well. So I also want to point folks to our Twitter page. We're very active on Twitter in terms of putting the research out there, but also with live tweeting events and conferences that we attend. So next slide, please. So today's webinar features 4 distinguished speakers that I'm so excited to have with us today to talk about pathways to high-quality jobs for young adults. And I'm going to quickly introduce our speakers now. And if anyone's interested in full biographies of the speakers, they're going to be published on the webinar information page for your reference. So first, we have Kristen Abner, who's a senior scholar at Child Trends and is currently the principal investigator on 2 projects related to youth employment and workforce development at the local and national levels. We have Kelly Murphy, who's the deputy director in the youth development program area at Child Trends. She's conducted applied research and evaluation on the promotion of positive youth development for nearly a decade. We have Martha Ross, who's a fellow at the Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institution, and her work focuses on human capital and strategies to increase the skills, employment, and earnings of current and future workers. And finally, like I mentioned, we have Patricia McGuire, who will be our discussant, and she has been president of Trinity, Washington University since 1989. President McGuire writes and speaks on a variety of topics concerning higher education, women, and Catholic education. Next slide, please. If you have any questions when you listen to any of our speakers today, we encourage you to type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. I'm hoping we have some time for some exciting dialogue, so please feel free to type in the box. Please note which speaker you're addressing your question to so we can direct it to them at the end of the webinar. So again, I want to encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter. We have a hashtag SSRC webinar, which is displayed on your screen. So thanks for your attention. Thank you for joining. And I will now turn the mic over to Kristin Abner.
And thank you, Kristen, and thank you all for joining this webinar. This is Chris Moore, Senior Scholar at Child Trends. This has been a very productive partnership between Child Trends and Brookings, and I'd like to thank the other co-authors who made this work and this presentation possible. Vanessa Sachs and Alex Mann from Child Trends and Nicole Bateman from Brookings. I'd also like to thank the Annie E. Casey Foundation for their support of this work and the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse for hosting this webinar. Before we launch into things, let me give you a brief overview of how the presentation will go. I will talk briefly about our research question and data source and describe 2 key definitions. And then Kelly Murphy will describe our analytic approach and share findings. Next, Martha Ross will discuss the implications and recommendations flowing from this work. And then Pat McGuire will provide us with her observations as discussant as president of Trinity College. Our research question is to examine how young people find their way to high-quality jobs in adulthood. We put a lot of thought into measuring job quality. I'd add that we focused on job quality at age 29 to allow people enough time to finish high school, enroll in college or other training, maybe take a few detours along the way, and have time to settle into a job that may be the start of a longer career trajectory and that pays enough to live on. We also wanted to narrow our focus and look specifically at adolescents less likely to enroll in and complete college right after high school. Believe it or not, researchers do not set out to prove the obvious, and we were not interested in finding that the best predictor of a high-quality job is to come from a middle-class or affluent family, go straight to college after high school, graduate on time, and then launch a career. We wanted to focus on young people for whom that path is less clearly marked and accessible. Then our goal was to identify whether there were particular education, training, employment, and other experiences in people's teens and early to mid-20s associated with getting a high-quality job. To do all that, you need data. We used the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, the 1997 cohort. This is a nationally representative survey of people born between 1980 and 1984, and it was launched in 1997 when the respondents were in their teens. It has followed them over time through 17 rounds of questions thus far, asking detailed questions about their lives and experiences, including education and employment. Now, what makes for a good job? It isn't any one thing we decided, but an amalgam of positive characteristics. We identified 4 constructs. Wages matter, of course, but so do fringe benefits like health insurance and retirement plans. And work hours also matter, with too many hours or too few hours being undesirable. But what is just right varies across individuals. We were able to measure these constructs with data from the NLSY, and fortunately, the database also asked a subjective question about job satisfaction. This added dimension allows us to recognize that some people are very satisfied with working long hours, working in the gig economy, or working at a job they love, even though the pay is modest. Coding these 4 different constructs on a common measure was, of course, a challenge. We decided on a common code comprised of 3 categories: low quality, medium quality, and high quality. For wages, 0 is low quality, and it is coded if the respondent's wage on their main job falls below 200% of the federal poverty level. 1, medium quality, is a wage that falls between 201 and 399% of the federal poverty line, while 2, high quality, is a wage that falls at 400% of the federal poverty line or higher. Fringe benefits were coded similarly based on the information in the NLSY, which covered whether workers get paid leave, have a retirement plan, or have health insurance. Low quality, 0, is coded if they don't get any of these benefits. Medium quality is coded if they get 1 or 2, while high quality means they get all 3 types of benefits. Work hours was really tough. We know that fewer hours generally means lower income, while long hours can undermine physical and mental health. So we decided to isolate the extremes. Low quality was defined as either 1 to 20 hours or 61 or more hours. Medium quality was defined as either 21 to 30 hours or 51 to 60 hours, while the high quality category includes 31 to 50 hours. Finally, the measure of job satisfaction is coded in a pretty straightforward manner. Low quality is coded when the respondent says they dislike their job or they think it's okay. Medium quality is when they say they like their job somewhat, and high quality is when they say they like their job very much. So each of these attributes has a score of 0, 1, or 2, and each is equally weighted. So the measure of job quality is an additive index that runs from 0 to 8. This is our dependent variable, the outcome of interest, the good job score. It has a decent distribution, as you can see on this next slide, where there are some cases doing 7 or 8. About 20% are each at 6, 5, and 4. And then we have a fair number of people down at the lower end in terms of their job quality. Turning now to our sample. We wanted to examine the predictors of a good job among young adults from backgrounds that were disadvantaged. Again, we didn't resonate to the notion that there is just one type of disadvantage or one measure, so we chose several measures of disadvantage that might characterize the background of a teenager. These include family income at or less than 200% of the federal poverty line, or neither parent has a post-secondary degree, or family receives public assistance, or the respondent's mother was in her teens when her first child was born. And of course, to study job quality, we needed a sample of young adults who were working. We looked at young adults at age 29, but if they were not working then, we looked at age 30 or 31, so as not to lose cases. In sum, our analytic sample included employed young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds. This next chart notes that most young adults are working, but young adults from backgrounds that were disadvantaged are less likely to be working than those who did not have any of these disadvantages in their background, 79% compared with 90% among young adults from non-disadvantaged backgrounds. Of course, young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds may work at quite different jobs than young adults who were not similarly disadvantaged. And this is, of course, why we wanted to study having a good job. And we do find that young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds are not only less likely to be working, but if they are employed, they are less likely to have a good job. For this descriptive analysis, we defined a good job as scoring 6 to 8 on the high end of the Job Quality Index. This chart shows that just 38% of young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds had what we've defined as good jobs, compared with 48% of those who were not similarly disadvantaged. Now, Kelly will provide an overview of our analytic strategy.
Thanks, Chris. So to answer our research question, we conducted descriptive analyses, like Chris just shared, as well as a path analysis, which is an extension of multiple regression. The use of path analysis allowed us to account for the relationship between each predictor variable and our outcome variable of job quality at age 29, enabling us to get at the unique or additive influence each predictor variable has on job quality. Finally, to address issues with missing data, which are common in longitudinal research, we used a statistical estimator called Full Information Maximum Likelihood, or FIML. We grouped our predictor variables into 4 categories: education, training, employment, and a broad category of what we refer to as demographic or other variables. We included this last category because research has shown that demographic factors such as gender, race or ethnicity, cognitive ability, as well as life experiences such as incarceration or teen parenthood are related to later employment outcomes. Thus, by including these factors in our model, we were able to statistically control for their effect on job quality and get at the unique effect training and employment experiences. As mentioned earlier, we are interested in understanding how a variety of experiences from age 16 through age 27 affected job quality at age 29. Because these experiences look very different at different periods in one's life, we developed 3 age windows. We defined our first age window, adolescence, as spanning from ages 16 to 19. This age window included predictor variables such as participation in career and technical education programs, or
CTE programs, participation in workforce training programs outside of high school, having a paid internship, and various metrics of teen employment. The second age window we refer to as emerging adulthood, which spans from ages 20 to 23 and includes experiences such as participation in a training program, unemployment, having a paid internship, and wages at age 23. Our last age window is young adulthood, which we define as spanning ages 24 to 27 and includes variables such as highest degree earned by age 27, earning a training certificate by age 27, and unemployment. Now, before I move on to the results, I wanted to explain some terms that will likely be unfamiliar, and that's because we created them for this analysis. So the NLSY 97 has 7 different categories of CTE programs. However, due to sample size constraints, we could not examine each program individually. So to address this issue, we grouped the programs into 2 categories. We categorize cooperative education programs, internships, apprenticeships, and mentoring programs as relationship-based CTE programs. And that's because their program design makes it likely that students will develop a positive relationship with an adult outside of high school. For example, internships and cooperative education programs strive to place students in workplaces with engaged supervisors who can provide guidance and support. And the whole point of mentoring is to build a supportive relationship. We recognize that there is likely considerable variability both in terms of implementation quality and the strength of relationships between youth and their supervisors. However, we felt that this thread of relationships inherent in these types of CTE programs was strong enough to make a coherent group. The other group of CTE programs includes career majors, tech prep, school-sponsored enterprise, and job shadowing. So the first 3 are all school-based, and while students can and do build strong relationships with their teachers, we thought the relationship with an adult outside of school was notable. And although job shadowing takes place in the workplace and involves a relationship with a working adult, it is of typically shorter duration than the relationship-based CTE programs we described earlier. And it's also designed more for career exposure than substantive work over time. So moving on to the results, as one would expect, cognitive test scores, coming of age during the Great Recession, experiencing incarceration and unemployment, and obtaining a high school diploma or post-secondary degree are all related to job quality at age 29. We also found that both teen employment, which was defined as having a job between the ages of 16 and 18, and participation in a relationship-based CTE program significantly predicted higher job quality at age 29. The positive effects of relationship-based CTE programs are particularly notable for 2 reasons. The first is simply that later job quality was only significantly affected by CTE programs that were relationship-based. The second is that although research has generally found that the effects of participation in training programs wash away over time, this result indicates that participation in relationship-based CTE programs in high school can affect job quality over 10 years later. We also found that higher earnings at age 23 were associated with higher job quality at age 29. Given that we controlled for multiple experiences and background characteristics, this finding is notable because it reflects that no matter a young person's education, work history, or cognitive test scores, early good jobs, as measured by wages, predict later good jobs. Participation in the training program between ages 24 and 27 was also associated with higher job quality at age 29, as was being married or cohabiting at age 27. And interestingly, although we found in the descriptive analyses that being Black was associated with lower job quality age 29, once we controlled for education, employment, training experiences, and the other background variables, this difference was no longer significant. In addition, being Hispanic was associated with greater job quality at age 29 than being non-Hispanic white. Finally, we found that even after controlling for education, employment, training, and other background variables, such as cognitive test scores, being female was associated with significantly lower job quality at age 29 than being male. So now that we've gone through the results, I will pass it to Martha, who will discuss the implications these findings have for practice and policy.
Thank you, Kelly. So what do we do with all this information? That is a pretty key question when you are someone who is running programs or setting policy. We came up with 4 major recommendations. The first is to strengthen work-based learning in high school, in career and technical education, but work-based learning does not have to be limited to career and technical education. What we know is that internships and apprenticeships of the sort that were measured here in this analysis, they allow students to learn workplace skills through working rather than before working in ways that are difficult to replicate in the classroom. And the recent reauthorization of the federal Perkins CTE legislation should provide more momentum and funding on this front for states and localities, since this new legislation emphasizes work-based learning. The second recommendation is to keep pushing on college access and increase efforts on college completion of both associate degrees and bachelor's degrees, with an explicit focus on quality and equity. It can be dangerous to set goals around completion. It can create perverse incentives to set up diploma mills or water down quality just to get people through the door. What we want to see instead is schools redesigning their programs and allocating resources differently so that when they enroll students, they clearly have a plan and the capacity to graduate those students with a quality education. So that includes proactive advising, financial aid and assistance with emergencies, redesigning course offerings so that the path to a degree is clear and user-friendly, greater alignment with high schools, including dual enrollment programs or early college, and bridge programs to help students gain college-level skills if they are not entering with them, especially in math and reading. And then third, we recommended creating stronger on-ramps to employment, particularly for teens and young adults without post-secondary credentials. We have, in this country, one of the worst systems to support school-to-work transitions for young people, particularly for people who are not immediately enrolling in college. And what we have relied on mostly is just throwing people into the economy as a way of socializing them and welcoming them into adulthood, and it is clearly not working. So these different on-ramps can take different forms. In high school, it could be the work-based learning of the sort I just described, as well as much stronger career exploration and advising. Guidance counselors at the high school level are usually focused on course selection and college applications, both of which are important, but they're not required to have any knowledge about the labor market or types of degrees that lead to types of jobs. And for older youth, past high school age, or for those who have left high school without a degree, programs are more likely to be offered by nonprofits or community groups, and sometimes post-secondary programs. And they'll involve work readiness skills, academic training, mentoring, paid internships or stipends, and supportive services. But for each of those recommendations, it's important not to fall into the trap of mistaking access for quality. Access to work-based learning in high school is not sufficient. It has to be good work-based learning. Access to job training isn't sufficient. It must be good job training. to state the obvious, but sometimes it's worth doing. And lastly, we'd like to see more research and action on the ideas suggested by our CTE findings, that relationships matter. That's not a new insight, that relationships are critical to human development and to learning, but you don't always see it reflected in program design or in staffing and funding of youth employment or training programs. So what would it look like if a core principle of every youth employment and training program was to build a positive, supportive relationship between a young person and a caring adult? And then how would you do it? How would you measure it to know if you're doing it well? These are important questions, and I think there is a lot of knowledge in the field about how to do it, but I think it's unevenly housed, and we can do a lot more to build that knowledge and share it. And then my next step is to turn it over to hear from someone who is actually carrying out many of these activities to help young people succeed. Next up is Pat.
Okay, Martha. Well, I'm sitting here silently cheering and waving my arms and giving you fist bumps for everything you just said, because as an educational practitioner, there's not a single thing I would disagree with what you just said. And in particular, I want to underscore, if a college welcomes low-income students from high schools that have not sufficiently prepared them, the college must be ready to walk with them all the way through to success in graduation, and not just throw them in and expect them to succeed. So Trinity Washington University, just a brief précis for those who are listening in, we're a historic Catholic women's college, but we have transformed into an urban institution serving still primarily women in the District of Columbia and nearby counties. We are 80% Pell grantees. Our median family income is just about $25,000. Half of our students are from the District of Columbia and some of the most impoverished parts of D.C. Our student body is about 95% African American and Latina. And we have a very large population of dreamers as well, more than 100 in our traditional women's college. We still have a women's college daytime, and we have graduate and professional education as well. What this study is so great for, and what it reinforces, is the pathways to success require all of us, the schools, the colleges, the employers, to work together to build the bridge into these high-quality jobs, which are quite possible. We know from all the work we have done with students from low-income backgrounds that when we build the bridge and walk with them on the pathway, they can absolutely be successful. The students have the capacity for success, but we need to build the connective. One of the things that is important to note, and I'm sure many participants in this webinar know, there's a great deal of attention being paid to the idea that elite colleges have to accept more low-income students. And that's really great, and I hope they do. But that is just a pinhead of the large volume of students today in higher education, many of whom are low to moderate income, many of whom are enrolled part-time. In fact, the Department of Education tells us more than 75% of all of today's undergraduates have what we used to call non-traditional characteristics, which today are just the norm. And those characteristics include going to school part-time, working while in college, and being parents. About 25% of all undergraduates also have children, which is another important issue. Now, what we've learned at Trinity, which is part of what this discussion is about, that in order to be intentional, we have to meet the student where she's at, and we have to understand what she knows and doesn't know. Part of the problem with the school-to-college transition is that there is so much that, and most low-income students, by the way, are probably first generation. There's so much that first-generation students don't really know about how to go to college, starting with, do I have to go to orientation? Do I have to show up at class? What is a syllabus? What is a curriculum? We use this very dense academic vocabulary. So we have learned that, first of all, we have to back up the process into the high schools, and we have to start working with students to teach them about the process of not only applying to college, which all high schools today, including the most impoverished urban schools, are all pushing their students to apply to college, but what does it mean to go to college? That's a different issue from just applying, and what does it mean to be successful? So we have started, among other things, which many other colleges have begun to do, although not so many private colleges, but they will soon. We have started working with the DC public schools to do dual enrollment on a number of programs. I just heard from our dean. We have 25 high school students from DC going to be participating this summer in a biomedical course on this campus as dual enrollment. We're also going to be developing an early college high school model with DC for some students. We also are doing a summer bridge program with DC in order to be sure that students really use a portion of the summer wisely to prepare to get ready to go to college. So those are some of the things that we do, but there still needs to be more. Part of this discussion about jobs really resonated with me because we have a nursing program that's about 10 years old at Trinity. And what we've discovered is that many, many young people, especially young women from our local public schools, come to college saying they want to be nurses, and it turns out they have no idea what that means in terms of their academic preparation. And in their first semester, they're blown away by the idea that they have to take chemistry and math. And then they feel that they can't succeed, and so they stop coming to school. Well, we don't want that to happen, so we work very hard through the advising system and all the coaching and tutoring we do to keep them in college and help them find a major pathway where they can be more successful. And if they can't really get into nursing, there still is a great career for them in health services. So understanding what the student needs by way of career pathway and then getting back into the schools and saying, you know, we have to start this nursing pathway in middle school, actually. It can't even be high school. It has to be earlier. We're having those discussions with DC. The other thing we have to do is work with the parents, the families, the students, the parents, at a much earlier age on what financial aid is all about. Financial aid can be extremely daunting for many students, and especially those for whom English is not their first language, and there's all of this jargon, and it's not enough to do it in the second semester of senior year. It really needs to start in much earlier grades, so we're working with DC on that as well. We do other things with our admissions office. We have a group of admissions counselors who will go to a school and do a whole day with prospective students, even doing instant decision days, so they can complete all their paperwork in a holistic way. We also will do FAFSA days with them. I even hate that word. It's so bureaucratic, FAFSA, but you have to do that. Once they're enrolled here in school, we also have an increasingly intensive advising program. We use software called Starfish to track the students and to intervene. And one of the things we put a great deal of emphasis on is attendance. Every faculty member has to take attendance, and we go after students if they're missing for a day or two and let them know we really care about getting them into class. On the positive side, the internships and the undergraduate research opportunities are essential to get the students hooked into their subject matter and their career pathways. Most of our students are employed before they graduate in the career pathways that they want to be on, and that really relates to the quality internships and the research projects that they've been able to do while undergraduates. Well, I could go on, but at this point I know there's a whole lot of questions here, so we want to get to the Q&A pretty quickly, but this is very exciting, and I'm going to encourage my peers in higher education to get into this research and really act on it.
Thank you so much, Pat. And excuse me, our other speakers, this is Kristen Abner again, and I will be fielding questions to our speakers. And the first question, there's quite a few comments, Pat, for you in folks that, in thinking about how this report, and I know it's hot off the press, has impacted your work and what you're doing. So how are you taking this research and applying it? And I appreciate kind of your discussion about the Bridges program and the dual enrollment that you're doing with DC Public Schools, but how are you thinking about this research and how it will directly impact kind of your plans?
Is that directed to me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Sorry.
Well, no, that's fine. I'm just I'm reading the questions and listening at the same time. So it affects us in strengthening the work we're doing with the DC Public Schools, with their school to college partners and school to college to careers. This really helps us to begin to understand more precisely what are some of the strategies that need to occur in the schools, what are the strategies we need to continue in college, and how do we do better alignment so it doesn't feel like apples and oranges. We need to stop thinking about higher ed as dramatically different, and instead it needs to be very, very connected to what the schools are doing. I see a question has come up also about apprenticeships. And so the other piece of this, yes, apprenticeships are great, and sometimes gap years are great. There's always been this pressure that the student has to go immediately from 12th grade into freshman year of college, and sometimes that doesn't work. There's a bigger policy issue about whether we can change some of the expectation that college is just for young people coming right out of high school, when in fact that's not really true. Half of undergrads today are over age 25. Some students need a little seasoning. If the schools and with colleges could work with employers to build other kinds of gateways, that's terrific. I will say the footnote to that, however, is most professions do require at some level some kind of collegiate training. Here in DC, for example, now even being a teacher aide in a child care center requires an associate degree. Most healthcare fields require some kind of post-secondary credential. So it doesn't always have to be a baccalaureate degree, but the student needs to see that along the line, to keep advancing into higher quality jobs, the student does need to be in a post-secondary institution to get credentials. Community colleges are great also, and they're not in this discussion and should be, because they also do a great deal of this work.
Great. Thank you, Pat. I have one more question that I will shoot your way, Pat, and then I have a couple others for some of the other speakers. But I'm going to read this directly because I think it's, Pat, you talked about FAFSA and the financial aid forms. So this comment is somebody who is 28 and came from an under-resourced family and community, and one of the major issues they had with their education was a lack of financial literacy. And it was really difficult to get a job, and they found themselves in credit card debt. So, and found this vicious cycle. So has your school done anything to address kind of that initial financial literacy piece as it relates to DC high school students, but also with the students at Trinity?
Yes, we do financial literacy workshops and seminars all the time. It is essential. Most of our students, even if they're 18 years old, are really self-supporting. Most of them are also supporting family members, including their own children, even at young ages. They are also taking on student debt, and we've all read about the student loan crisis. We don't want them to take on a lot of debt. We provide a lot of grant support and try to help them find grant support, but we caution them against getting into a lot of credit card debt. We try to counsel them on that. We're very wary of vendors who want to sell them credit cards or get them into the credit card scheme. We try to talk to them about budgeting and spending. Now, it's very hard because college students, even in a school like Trinity, which has a majority of very low-income students, they see their peers at other colleges. They want the same thing that everybody else has, and this is where the debt cycle begins to accelerate. If you're in class or you see your friends across town who have all this stuff that they bought or their parents bought, and they want that, and you don't want to deny them because that's part of life, but you can't go into debt to get all of that. The debt that's accumulated just on cell phone bills tends to be pretty extraordinary. So having counselors and advisors, our financial aid team, to sit with them and say, let's help you think about choices. It's not that you have to deny yourself. It's okay for you to want this or want that, but you have to make priorities. And if you have to figure out how am I going to save up to get that thing that I really want, let's talk about how you do that. It's hard, especially for low-income students whose needs are enormous. We also provide a great deal of support that's not always reflected up front, but when a student has a hard time buying books or even food, we have a big food pantry. We provide Metro cards. We even have an emergency fund that will pay rent and utility bills if need be. So we're always reaching out to students, and what we do know is there's a point at which it's not about financial literacy, it's about poverty. And we have to keep in mind that when we're dealing with the least economically capable citizens, it's not always because they don't want to do the right thing, it's because they just have no financial resources. Being in school, trying to help them get a job will get them to a plateau of economic stability, we hope, and we want them to feel good about getting there. So it's a complex issue, to be sure.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate that, raising the complexity of the issue for sure. What I want to do is kind of throw a question out to all of our speakers around this research. Were there any findings that you all were particularly surprised about, and why?
Well, this is Chris Moore, and I would say that I was surprised by the positive relationship-based career and technical education finding. The fact that, more than 10 years went by and that a signal could be detected from that point during adolescence to age 29 or 30 was really quite remarkable to me. We certainly know that relationships are important. They're important for young children in child care centers. They're important for middle schoolers in after-school programs. They're important for adolescents in after-school programs as well. But carrying it forward into this age group was really an interesting finding, and I think an unusual finding that has very important implications for how people might structure training programs.
Great, thank you, Chris. Chris, can you talk a little bit about how you all weighted the qualities of jobs? So were they all weighted equally in your analysis?
Yeah, yes, they were, and that's an interesting question, and we did a lot of looking as a team to see what other research has been done, and I'm sure people listening are well aware that wages are considered wages and income, like the outcome of interest in many studies. Some people look at unemployment. To our knowledge, this is the first study that looked at an amalgam of, what really comprises a good job, and I think when you think about it in your heart, you know that it's not just what you earn. It's a variety of things that really make you feel like you do or do not have a good job. In the absence of any prior research, it seemed most reasonable to weight them equally.
Great. Thank you. And relatedly, and this question was directed at Kelly, can you speak about how you narrow down the facets of job quality? So that includes wages, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. If you go back to do you mean how we chose those main categories or how we coded each one.
This is Kristen. My understanding of the question is how you chose them initially.
Well, we initially did a literature scan, and we kind of looked at job quality, and then I think it is also just based on our knowledge of working with programs that are either providing workforce development training or some of the conversations we've had with employers as well as young people to kind of get at the different facets of job quality, and we ended up landing on, of course, income as well as hours worked, thinking about burnout or being underemployed, and then job satisfaction, which we feel often doesn't get enough credit in the literature, and then fringe benefits. And we are also somewhat limited in just which data were available in the NLS Y97. It probably has a lot more data about different work experiences, I think, than other data sets, which is one of the reasons why we used it. But we were somewhat limited in what they measured.
Data set limitations. I think many of us on the line can feel that pain. Thank you so much. So there's some questions about, both to Chris and Martha, about the specific types of jobs or sectors that the youth worked in their late teens and early 20s, and how that experience led to a higher degree of career success. So I'm not sure if you have that information, but I'll throw it out there. And then thinking about job sectors, what specific sectors were the 29-year-olds employed in, and what proportion were in each sector? So talking about public, nonprofit, or private.
Martha has talked about the importance of doing that work, so I think I'll let her take that question.
We don't know from the data from our analysis. That would be further analysis that we would love to do, would have loved to do, if we had had more time and more money. As Chris implied, I was really interested in that question myself, and would be really interested in continuing this research to get at that.
And I note another question about the opportunities, employment opportunities in the person's community, and that's another really important aspect. I mean, we don't want to imply that the only things related to people getting a good job are the decisions that a young person makes. They are very much advantaged by having certain experiences or disadvantaged by not having them, but there are also contextual factors, like the jobs that are available in their community and the extent to which there's high unemployment versus a lot of job opportunities where they live.
Thank you, Chris. I think, yes, thinking about economic conditions as it relates to that is an important thing to raise, so I appreciate that you said that. Martha, somebody wanted to know if you're suggesting standards for mentoring, which is a required service under WIOA.
Yes, they would be. There are standards out there, and my guess is that people on this call may know more than I do about those standards. But I would look at what the National Mentoring Partnership has developed, and then I would also look at best practices from some of the networks that have a lot of experience in structuring work-based learning experiences in high schools, like the Linked Learning Network and the National Academies Foundation. because mentoring can happen in sort of a standalone mentoring program, but it can also happen within the context of being a supervisor. And a good work-based learning program is going to build in some level of mentorship. I mean, there's a continuum of intensity, but I would look to those organizations for more resources as well.
And there are some interesting hints from other research as well. For example, mentoring programs, when a mentor is really a short-lived experience ends abruptly, that actually can be harmful. So mentoring needs to be relationship-based and lasting if possible. Child Trends has been working with Annie Casey Foundation on a program called Generation Work, which is focused on having positive young adult development kinds of approaches to job training and early employment activities. And I'm working through to kind of figure out, well, what does that look like? And there certainly are programs, people working in the real world, as it were, are finding their findings that are very similar to what we find doing this research. They really are aligned. And we've seen in Generation Work that many of the staff in the training programs, the education programs, really get the importance of having a positive, supportive relationship for the young person. Extending that to employers is the next question. You know, are employers open to that? Maybe in a tight labor market they will be. But I think that would be optimal, apprenticeships that are real, for example. But I think that, you know, it's really exciting to me that work is beginning to explore some of these possibilities.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about apprenticeships, and so there were a couple questions, some directed at Pat and some to Martha, and Chris, I know you can speak to this as well, about the research out there to ascertain the effectiveness to help disadvantaged youth succeed in various trade occupations. And I know ascertaining effectiveness is a difficult question. And then thinking about if folks have experience with the DOL YouthBuild program, if any of our speakers could speak to that model as it relates to your research, that would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is Pat, and I do not have direct experience with YouthBuild, but obviously the construction trades industry is one that lends itself quite well to the idea of apprenticeship and skills teaching. And Lord knows, I mean, here in D.C. and in many major cities, there are jobs galore, and those are well-paying jobs and should be something that's seen as desirable for youth who may not really want to spend a lot of time sitting in class reading books, but who really want to have great jobs, and those are essential. We all need these wonderful buildings that the construction trades provide. I think there's an issue that I don't know if it's been researched in the work done on either apprenticeships or mentoring and even internships with low-income youth, and it would be interesting. What are the factors that cause those experiences to be less successful, and what happens? And I'm going to venture a hypothesis based on conversations I've had with employers who always want to do the right thing and start out very eager. Oh yes, we want to have the young people come work with us and we'll teach them. There are social behaviors that sometimes young people exhibit because they may not have good role models for professionalism in their own lives. And so showing up on time is number one, especially if they've been in schools that don't require attendance, which is a problem in some schools here. So showing up on time, you know, being properly attired at work, that sounds so minimal. And I, as an educator, will work with a student on that, but an employer, you know, will see somebody who's inappropriately addressed and just immediately write them off. which of course is bad. Or some of the verbal skills that students need to develop that they may not have initially, or emotional IQ. So one of the questions is there research on how those factors affect the willingness of employers to work with students? And secondly, how do we train employers to provide effective apprenticeships and internships, which is not something you hear a lot about. It seems that the burden is all on the student. And I think we may need to get at those other issues.
This is Martha. I think of YouthBuild as having many of the most important elements for a program serving young people in really tough circumstances. And there's so they have stipends, they have mentoring, they have academic assistance if that's needed. They sort of built into it is work readiness preparation, since they're often working, at least when in the construction-focused programs, they're sort of working in a crew together under a supervisor. There's a evaluation from MDRC that came out last year that found that it helped, but not as much as people would have liked. And I think it'll be interesting to see how YouthBuild uses those findings from the evaluation, whether they were able to identify program elements that need additional work or something that didn't work at all. But I think we also need to think about how much we expect from these second chance programs that serve young people in really tough situations with not as much money as they probably need, and by which I'm talking about the programs. I think that's a chronic difficulty, that we expect a lot for not too much money, and we expect it rather quickly.
That's a great point.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions we have, and I want to encourage folks to sign up for the SSRC's e-newsletter, and as part of participating in the webinar, you'll also receive a notification when we post the webinar materials on our website. So you'll find the webinar recording transcript, and then we typically post additional Q&A as folks have it. So feel free to email the SSRC inbox if you have additional questions for our speakers, and we're more than happy to field them out to our speakers. So thank you to everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, and that does conclude today's webinar. We thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect.